September. Transitions is the only transition program for Winston Prep. I've been with Winston Preparatory School for over 17 years as a special educator. And about 10 years ago, I was pulled out of the classroom and asked to develop this program. So the idea behind Winston Transitions was, if we're looking at 100% graduation rate from our students from high school, and let's say 90 to 95% of our students are going to matriculate to college post a Winston Preparatory School experience, we wanted to see what we can do to make a difference for the 10%. And it started out servicing our students within our own communities. And very quickly, it started to branch out into working with other schools throughout the tri-state area primarily. Public schools, other private schools in New York City, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Long Island as well. And then obviously the 5 boroughs. But one of the things that we are kind of an all-encompassing life program. And a lot of what we do is geared around the social emotional growth and development of our students, further academic support and growth and development, preparation for college, if that's the appropriate track for a student. But employability skills is really one of the primary things that we're focusing on, because if we're really thinking about it, high school is a very short time in a person's life. College is also a very short time in a person's life. And you have to think about, where do we spend, if we're living long, healthy lives, where are we spending that time? We're spending that time as adults, and we're spending that time in the workplace. So getting a really strong foundation around employability skills is paramount to the success of our students moving forward, no matter what their path is after they've completed their time with us and their skill development with us. So just looking really quick at the data, that we've looked at in relationship to developing our program, and this is national data. So nationwide, young adults with learning differences are reported to be 46% employed, so gainful employment. 19% disclose a disability in the workplace. And then 5% are reporting that they're receiving any forms of accommodation. Now, there's a correlation between the disclosure piece and the actual access to accommodations. Disclosure is, the ability to share with somebody that you have some form of learning challenge or disability, physical disability, whatever it might be. And then through that disclosure process, gaining access to some form of accommodations within the workplace. It's the same for college and school. It applies very much in this setting. So developing that awareness, and we're going to talk a lot more about that throughout the presentation, is extremely important in the ability to disclose successfully. And it's not an easy thing to do, but it's important. Winston Preparatory School, through our longitudinal study, which is connected to our Lives Over Time study and our innovation lab, we've tracked where our students have gone historically, and we're looking at about 61% reporting employment. 30% feel that LD has affected their workplace performance. There was some recent statistics about a year or two ago from the mayor's office that represents about 85% of individuals with any form of a learning difference or disability are underemployed. I think that's a pretty important thing to look at. And what that means is, even if individuals are coming out of college with a degree, but they're still struggling with a lack of skill development, still struggling, they're not going to find the employment that would match their degree or where they might think they should be in their lives. So that's something that we look really closely at as well. Okay.
All right. So now I'm going to explain a little bit about the QSIL, or qualities of a sustainable and independent learner. So Winston Prep has been using these qualities for several years as a tool for assessing social emotional progress. It was formalized in 2012 through a partnership with the National School Climate Center and rolled out in a 3-phase project. So phase 1 was to identify these 8 qualities that lead to independence in life, and then establish the QSIL scales as a reliable and valid survey of these different qualities. So we developed the scales. Then phase 2 was to actually start in our community assessing students. So what we do is we have students take this survey twice a year, and we also have 2 teachers who work directly with that student take the survey. And I'll show you later on in the presentation then how we can use those survey results to create a platform for some really self-reflective conversations with students. We also enrolled some professional development, looking at how we can incorporate these 8 qualities in our instruction, and created a module for reporting the survey results and sharing that with families. And then phase 3, which is sort of at the point where we are now, has yet to be completed, is to use the QSIL survey in mainstream schools to further establish the reliability and then clearly establish a relationship between QSIL scores and student outcomes through longitudinal studies, so looking at the long-term picture. Before we get into the actual qualities and some of the strategies we use, I also wanted to talk a little bit about our overall approach at Transitions and Winston Prep School in general, which is the continuous feedback system. So our overall approach is that when a student applies, we start with assessment. And while that can include formal assessments like cognitive and academic scores, it's also going to include social emotional information about how the young person is managing the demands of school, their social relationships, and for transitions, how they're making preparations to enter adult life and the workforce. We use that information to create our initial understanding. And from there, we develop a program and see how the student responds. From that response, we can then revisit our assessment, engage the student in self-assessment, revise the program, and engage in further decisions, actions, and creations. And the ultimate goal of all of this is coming to a place of self-understanding for the student so that they leave the program in a position to decide, to act, to create, and assess themselves. And I include all of this as a preface to the rest of our presentation, just to emphasize that each strategy that we're going to share is not sort of an isolated approach, but part of this larger process where we're continually assessing, revising, and then responding. So we try a strategy, we see how the student responds, and then we tweak. All right, and so now John's going to delve into our first QSIL quality, which is resilience. And I'm just not sure if we mentioned before, because I see chat icons popping up. You can continue to type your questions into the chat, and then we're going to look at the end of the presentation, and we can circle back to questions then. Okay, John.
So resilience. Resilience in the very basic terms is the capacity to bounce back, right? So when we're looking at individuals coming into our program, I would say 99 to 100% of the students that we're working with are coming in with a lack of resilience, based on history, things that have happened to them in their lives, and how they're managing that. So the development of strong resilience is extremely paramount to everything that happens. It's really the underpinning. So for us, placing an emphasis on resilience, is where it all has to begin, and that is part of the process that we're going to start to describe as we go through these 8 dimensions. And it also leads to sustainability in the workplace, and that's extremely important.
All right, so we look at resilience in the workplace. A big area where this comes into play is in processing feedback. Processing feedback is a common challenge for the young people that we work with. For students who are coming into the program with low self-esteem, hearing feedback or knowing that they're about to receive feedback can just cause their defenses to fly up as a form of self-protection. And then for others, feedback can call for a change in behavior or mindset, which can be really challenging for students who find comfort in their established routines or way of doing things. So getting the most out of feedback involves being in the right frame of mind for it. And there are steps we can guide young people through in order to be able to truly benefit from the feedback. We use this acronym, BRACE, to break down the steps involved in managing some of the difficult emotions that can come up in a feedback session. So breathe, remember that the purpose is to help you improve, actively listen by eliminating distractions, clarify and ask questions, and then finally evaluate. One of the things that I really like about this acronym is that it breaks down what a young person should actively be doing during a situation when many young people would normally just take a very passive role, like thinking about Charlie Brown cartoons and the teacher just going, wah, 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 wah. I think students are very accustomed to taking that approach when adults are speaking with them. And so this really breaks down what are you actively doing as the person who is receiving the feedback. And it can lead to a much more productive conversation. Another strategy that we use with students to target resiliency is helping them develop an internal locus of control by strengthening their ability to distinguish between the things that they can and cannot control. Research shows that being able to see success as a direct result of one's actions or effort leads to greater resiliency. So in processing a difficult situation, it can be really useful to have a conversation that distinguishes between the elements that the student can control from those that they can't, because it gives a direction for moving forward and focuses their attention on what they can do. And then lastly, this is a very simple strategy that we use, embracing challenge. Another term that we encounter a lot in any discussion of resilience is Carol Dweck's concept of growth mindset. So very similar to the idea of having an internal locus of control, having a growth mindset means attributing success or progress to things that are in a person's control, like effort or practice, and viewing traits like talent and ability as qualities that can grow with effort. A very simple exercise that we use to target resilience is to just smile while saying the words, "This is challenging." So acknowledge the challenge and attribute a positive connotation to it through smiling. When they can view challenge as an opportunity to grow rather than something that's automatically negative, it can increase a young person's willingness to try strategies and push through the difficult situation.
So communication skills, socially and in a professional manner as well, are obviously essential to being successful in the workplace. Strong communication skills really allows for access to the full range of skill sets that aid in a successful development in anyone's life. And communication, this is going to be a running theme throughout the presentation. Communication requires understanding and it requires awareness. It connects to developing healthy relationships. It connects to being successful in the workplace. It connects to being successful in education. And without communication, advocacy breaks down. It doesn't happen successfully. So again, thinking about how an individual is going to adapt to different situations, relies on them understanding where the problem is in the first place, so that they can actually go to the person that they think might be able to help them in that moment and access the help and supports that they need. And that's in anything, in any kind of relationship, whether it's professional or personal.
Right. So when we think about strategies for addressing social communication skills, the theme we're thinking about is making the implicit explicit. So for young people with executive function challenges, multi-step processes are really difficult to navigate. Many of the actions that are required for effective communication, like active listening, actually require a really high level of integration of many different processes. And so that can be really challenging for someone with executive function difficulties. So breaking things down into sequential steps can really help. So those implicit steps that as adults we often go through without thinking, we make those explicit. And then having them organized into an acronym or a mnemonic device can further support their ability to actually retain and use those steps in a new situation. So on the left of the screen is an acronym we use to break down the process of active listening: receive, appreciate, summarize, and ask. Students get repeated practice with these steps in partner activities at transitions so that they can begin to internalize the steps and eventually reach a place where they can generalize it to other situations. And this strategy can be really useful in any situation where a young person is about to be given verbal instructions. And then similarly, students with nonverbal processing challenges, we need to make the implicit social cues that you see on the right, we need to make those explicit. So role play and rehearsal can be especially important for students with nonverbal learning differences because they have challenges generalizing or adapting the strategy to a new situation, even if they've learned it really effectively in school, for example. So the chart on the right has a lot of different elements of nonverbal communication, and what we'll do is maybe focus on one or two, practice it explicitly, and then what's really important is at the end of that, that activity or that practice session is to have an explicit conversation about future situations where paying attention to that element might be really important, because by talking about it in advance, it can further enhance their ability to actually apply this new skill to a different situation outside of the classroom.
So self-advocacy, again, and the running theme, and I think you'll start to see the interrelationship between all of these skills that we're talking about. They're dependent on one another. So self-advocacy requires, again, awareness. It requires understanding. It needs to be consistent. That's an extremely important part of everything that we're talking about here. And it also requires, again, thinking back to communication skills, it requires good communication skills.
All right, so for self-advocacy, I'm going to talk about scripts and flowcharts. So again, students with executive functioning or nonverbal processing challenges are likely going to struggle with determining when it's appropriate to self-advocate, either because they're having difficulty reading the cues that are telling them that they're struggling, or the steps involved in actually successfully seeking support are really complex. So providing scripts or flowcharts can help alleviate some of that burden of processing as they learn to navigate these situations. So the script on the left gives students examples of helpful and unhelpful feedback paired with an analysis of why it was helpful or not. This chart is meant to help students distinguish with the two criteria that helpful feedback is specific and actionable. So the idea is by looking at these examples of feedback they might hear, practicing how they would react, they will be able to then identify when they're not getting helpful feedback and be ready to self-advocate by saying either, oh, you know, I that was a little bit too general. Could you tell me more specifically? Or I don't know what I need to do. I need feedback that's actionable. The flowchart on the right was designed for students who work at our Housing Works thrift store internship. And it was designed so that they would be better equipped to take initiative in the store and minimize the amount of direction that they would need from supervisors. So this helps distinguish between times when they can act on their own and times when they really do need to advocate for support. And so even though this particular flowchart was created for a very specific setting, the idea of sitting down, thinking through the possible scenarios, and then with clear arrows, deciding, okay, if this happens, I can do this. If this happens, I can do that, can really, again, alleviate some of that processing in the moment, because they're sort of planning out in advance. This is how I'll handle the situation when it comes up. So that can be really useful for planning how and when to self-advocate in a work situation.
So self-regulation, again, this is something that we see with so many of our students in relationship to how they're managing their emotions, managing anxiety, managing impulses. You know, self-regulation is simply control, right? It's finding balance. It's you know, really reflecting on how you're reacting and responding to certain situations, both socially, professionally, academically. You know, it's essential to goal completion. It requires, again, awareness and self-reflection. It's, again, helps our students and any individual really react to situations in a more healthy way. So, you know, thinking about it for them in regards to pausing and slowing things down and working on reframing their thoughts and again, understanding of any situation that they find themselves in. You know, thinking about mindfulness, you know, stopping in those moments and being mindful of what's really going on and seeking help in those situations if you are not clear on about what's happening really.
Right. So our internship coordinators developed this awesome graphic, the self-regulation dashboard, as a sort of combination of multiple self-awareness and mindfulness tools, sort of all in one place. So going back to the idea of making the implicit explicit, instruction in how energy level, stress, mood, and thoughts can contribute to a person's ability to self-regulate can really help students begin to identify when they would need to step in and use a strategy like taking a deep breath or using a thought log. So the self-regulation dashboard is an integration of these tools. For example, the HALT meter, right? So the idea that if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, any of those criteria, that means it's a good time to halt, to pause, and to use one of your strategies. And so the idea is just teaching awareness of these different factors and that they can impact our ability to self-regulate. And so when we can recognize that one of these factors is coming into play, that's a moment to find a way to get some extra time.
So again, self-reflection, very much connected to the ability to self-advocate successfully. Self-reflection is, again, connected to self-regulation. If we're not able to stop in those moments and reflect on how we're reacting or how we're feeling about something, it's very hard to manage that successfully. It leads to strong advocacy. It leads to self-regulation. It builds on the ability to communicate effectively. And then ultimately, it allows for stronger resilience in our lives, right? When we're able to stop and reflect on things that we've done in our past, not harp on them or use them as you know, ways to make excuses for things that are happening currently. You know, we could go on about that, but it's really, you know, about using it as a way to move our lives forward. And that's what we have to always be thinking about in regards to the work that we do with our students. How do we get them to self-reflect successfully? And it's also connected to feedback.
So one strategy we use to sort of answer John's question, how do we get them to self-reflect effectively, is with side-by-side evaluation. So this is an example of the survey tool that I mentioned earlier at the start of the presentation. So students answer survey questions that have been designed to measure each of the QSIL qualities. and then 2 teachers answer the same set of questions for the student. And then we have this tool that allows us to compare side by side how the student perceives their development in these qualities with how their teachers perceive it. And so this can be a really powerful way to start a conversation about self-awareness and accurate self-reflection. It can be really difficult, and so this would be a situation where we would use a strategy like BRACE, what I mentioned earlier with regards to resiliency, to frame the conversation so that the student is in a good emotional place to be able to actually benefit from the feedback. And then, without necessarily having this specific survey tool at your fingertips, just the idea of before a young person gets feedback, giving them an opportunity to self-evaluate. So how do you think you did with this before I tell you, can be a really great way to start a conversation where self-reflection is actually happening.
Problem solving. When we're thinking about adulthood, and we're all adults in the room, it often is a series of problems that we have to solve on a daily basis, whether it's things that we're trying to navigate with our children, managing bills, managing the workplace, trying to compartmentalize the things that we're dealing with. I think we all can agree that it can be really overwhelming and challenging, and clearly right now we're all being faced with some extreme challenges and how we're dealing with that. So, for our students as they're emerging into adulthood, this is very process oriented, and how we approach it is very process oriented with them. And again, you're going to hear me saying this often, and I think you've already getting it, that it's interrelated with everything that we've been talking about. It's again connected to and requires self-reflection, self-advocacy, sometimes, not always, resilience, very much so, because oftentimes when we're met with a challenge or a problem, we can get really frustrated and just want to give up and walk away from it and not have to deal with it. But that doesn't solve the problem, because the problem can often grow larger and become unmanageable and then really be a problem. It requires good communication skills. Oftentimes we'll talk with students and observe how they're performing in any situation around a project or even a social situation. And you reflect back to them if they try that same, if they try to attack that same problem, or that problem rather, the same way 3 or 4 times and end up with the same result, and oftentimes it's not a positive result, then it's time to reevaluate and try something different, right? And sometimes it may require advocacy and saying, hey, I'm really stuck here. I might need to go to somebody else and ask for help. So that's obviously a very important part of being in the workplace as well.
All right, so returning again to that theme of making the implicit explicit, and the idea that problem solving is a process, we break down that process into 6 steps. Empathize, define, ideate, evaluate, act, and monitor. So in the program, we will we'll work through these 6 steps with students, both on like hypothetical problems, as well as in self-reflection about actual problems that have arisen at their internships. But just in general, brainstorming possible problems and coming up with sort of these hypothetical situations can really help with that generalization piece, right? Because even if they successfully work through the process in a classroom setting, the challenge is always how do they then apply that to a new situation? And for students with nonverbal learning differences, that can be really difficult. So coming up with hypotheticals similar to the flowchart idea of thinking through what are the possible problems that can come up, and then using the 6 steps to think through how would I solve that problem, can be really helpful for that generalization piece.
Right, so social responsibility. For us, our community is extremely important to us, and when we're even going through the admissions process and considering working with a student, identifying if we're the appropriate fit for them, but also thinking about, who they're going to be in the community. And then also thinking about who they're going to grow into when they start engaging in a process like this. And that's obviously, something that we, we look for in relationship to that, but it's also an expectation that we hold very dearly for our students. So helping them identify what role they play in any community in their life, not just our community, but the communities that they live in, the work communities that they might find themselves in. If they're going off to higher education, Summit Camp is a community, right? So thinking about their roles in that, how they're supporting others, how are they collaborating and contributing in those situations. The idea that action speaks volumes. An individual's action within any community is going to have a ripple effect, right? It could be both positive and negative. Obviously, we're always striving for positive interactions and positive contributions to a community, and that requires empathy, and helping our students understand the power of empathy, and helping them understand the power that they can have within a community. And we look to help them develop leadership skills. And that's a really important part of that, so that they're going out into the workplace, they're going out into their lives, and they're taking on a leadership role at any given moment. It doesn't have to be the big boss job necessarily, but they're going out and they're taking charge of their lives, and they're becoming leaders of their own lives. And that takes social responsibility as well.
All right, so with regards to social responsibility, most of our students, we feel, already possess a strong desire to be part of the community, but they struggle with the perspective taking and the initiative that are sort of prerequisites for being able to do that effectively. So emotional literacy and being able to identify one's own emotions is a key first step to being able to do that accurately in others, practice empathy. So providing students with the vocabulary for identifying emotions accurately and specifically is something that we do as sort of a first step to developing empathy. We really like the organization of the mood meter on the left from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, just because of how it organizes the emotions on a spectrum. You have like pleasantness and then energy level. So it can really start to help distinguish and compare and contrast between closely related but distinct and different emotions. And then we encourage our students to label their emotions as a way of developing that ability to then eventually be able to label it or understand it coming from others. And then in addition to emotional intelligence, taking initiative is a huge aspect of social responsibility when you think about it in a workplace context, because it means being relied on to carry out your responsibilities without being needed to be told to do so. So as I mentioned earlier in our discussion of self-advocacy, a flow chart and planning out how will I respond in this scenario, how will I respond in that scenario, can be really helpful for students to anticipate opportunities where they can take initiative and be prepared to take advantage of them.
So management and organization, again, I would say probably 100% of our students are struggling with some form of executive functioning difficulties. So the development of executive functioning skills is, again, paramount to having a good handle on management and organization in your life. And management and organization requires, again, self-reflection, self-regulation, self-advocacy. It requires, or really supports rather, good communication skills, right? So a lot of what we see with the individuals that we work with, that organizing information can be really challenging, processing information and being able to put that information back out again in a successful way, again, requires skill sets that we just mentioned, but, it supports that ability to disclose, kind of going back to the very beginning of the presentation, in management and organization, as I think we would all agree, is important in almost any workplace. So again, focusing on that with with our students is just another way of providing them with significant skills to move forward in their lives.
So I'm going to talk about two elements in our approach to management and organization, with the overall idea being that effective management and organization is all about finding the right tools and then having lots of practice using them so that you're able to use them effectively. Without promoting Google Suite too heavily, I just want to talk about why at our program we really feel that Google Suite is incredibly effective for our students with executive function challenges, just because it's so integrated, right? So there are apps and tools for every kind of management need, but they don't necessarily always work together or are accessible on multiple devices. And so the one thing we really like about Google Calendar, Gmail, Google Docs is that they all work together. They can be accessed from anywhere. And it's just through sort of one sign-in, one password. So that's the one thing we really recommend and why we use it in the program. And not just use it, but we also then explicitly teach our students how to use all of the different tools. So this is just an example, right? Like how would one access your calendar while you have your Gmail app open? We go through these exercises, again, that practice, so that when they need to use it for a real authentic need, they've done it so many times that it's seamless, and the processing and the following the steps doesn't pose such a burden. And then lastly, setting up a workspace is another really important element of management and organization. This is a plan that one of our focus teachers developed for a specific student who had set a goal. She was an artist and had set a goal of starting her own Etsy shop. And so the focus teacher worked with her to sort of lay out this 7-step plan for organizing her workspace. So while some of these steps are very specific to this particular student, just the idea of starting with research and creating like a visual, finding a visual of what you want your workspace to look like, then listing what are your needs and what do you want in terms of how your workspace should function, then editing. So going through all of the materials that are in that space, or putting like items together, finding a home for everything, and then assessing and evaluating how that space is working and revisiting the process on an ongoing basis. It's been very effective. So we just wanted to share that as well. That it's, yes, the digital workspace is important, and that's where Google comes in, and then the physical workspace is also incredibly important. All right, and so that we have gone through all 8 qualities. And so we're going to open it up for questions now. I think I'll need to stop sharing in order to view the questions, and then we can always come back to the presentation if we need to.
This is the good part. We love a good dialogue. So throw some questions at us.
Okay, so let me see. Okay, so somebody asked about sharing slides. Sorry, I see you were asking that in the beginning, Nancy. We can absolutely send out a PDF of these slides. So hopefully you still took great notes. Oh, and I see Thea wrote that we're recording.
It. Well,
yep, okay, great. Okay, what is the age group of kids coming into this program?
17 to 21. Typically. Sometimes we get students a little bit younger, and sometimes we have students a little bit older. We're also working on a post-21 program as well.
Mark Miller asked, what are the signs of low self-esteem? So we mentioned low self-esteem earlier when we're talking about resiliency. How do we identify that in students?
Yeah, I mean, that's really unique to the individual. You know, I think, you know, self-doubt, self-deprecation, you know, we've seen students, you know, break down in various situations. um, say things that are very negative about themselves. As I said, self-deprecation, um, not allowing themselves to try new things. I actually don't even like the word try. I feel like it doesn't really say much. We want to push our students into action. And when somebody puts up a giant wall of defense, it's usually, as I was kind of mentioned before a little bit, based on what they've experienced in their lives. We get a lot of our students, and I think just, we're dealing with this as, with emerging young adults in general these days, anxiety, becoming very stressed out about situations that seem out of their control. I mean, the list could go on and on. I'm a parent myself of I have 3 kids, 2 of which have learning differences. So I can completely relate to what many of you are probably struggling with in your own personal lives as well. So the signs are varied.
Susanna asked, is our school in New Jersey open for students or virtual? So just to clarify, there's no transitions program in New Jersey, but there is a Winston Prep school, and they are doing blended learning. So they have students on campus and then also at home.
Right, and that's what we're doing as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Daniel O'Neill, your question is so personal and has so much of your personality in the question. I wonder if you could come on microphone and just ask it.
Luke has been at camp a few times. Taya and Leah know him very well. He is very energetic and he has very, very big dreams, but his dreams certainly outpace his capabilities. With our older 2 daughters, we have always said you can do whatever you set your mind to, right? That's what we tell our kids, just dream big. But what do I do with Luke, who doesn't have that dash of reality? He's only this year accepted the fact that Santa isn't real, even though, when they're little, you say, oh yeah, Santa, Santa, Santa. Then a few years ago, we started saying, Luke, he's not real. And Luke would say, yes, he is. Luke isn't well grounded in reality, but he has beautiful dreams. So how do you balance the 2?
Well, first, I'm a little upset because you just shattered the whole Santa thing for me.
Sorry, John.
Come on. Again, it's where the way that we base all of this is in reality, right? And the last thing we want to do is, beat somebody over the head and crush their dreams and say, you can't, right? It's more about aligning them with, again, that understanding of where they are in their lives. And that can be really challenging. But it's beyond important, because what will potentially happen for Luke and for you as a family is the longer that that's not addressed, the larger it becomes a problem, right? And doing it in a safe, supportive environment where they're provided opportunities that might open up an awareness and a window to other things that they might not have even thought about is really important. And again, we're not the panacea, and that's what this isn't, this isn't about that, but it's about, really looking at it from a perspective of how transparent do I need to be without really damaging their self-esteem. My wife and I just had this conversation with one of my sons who's a senior in high school, and, talking about some of the things that he wants to do, and he has a learning difference. It is important to be transparent, but provide other options that are very realistic. And again, I think through the work that we're doing in the program, through the internship opportunities, through the consistent messaging, through all the strategies and the work, that we have outlined here in this presentation, and that can be done by you as an individual with your children as well, even though it can be harder coming from a parent to a kid, to your child. That's the important piece of it. They do start to realize that there are other options out there. Luke might not be an NBA basketball player. He might not be a famous rock star. He might not be an astronaut. He might not be a brain surgeon. We don't know, but there might be some other things out there that are really cool for him. He just doesn't know what they are. He's right now locked into what he sees in the world around him, but hasn't yet been exposed to other more grounded in reality type of opportunities. Does that make sense?
Does.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Lucille asked, do students need a high school diploma to attend, and is it residential or daytime? So students do not need a high school diploma. In fact, if you're pursuing funding, it benefits to not have a diploma, and they can earn their diploma. We can provide a Winston Preparatory School diploma, which is accredited through New York State Association of Independent Schools. This is a day program. It is not residential. So students live at home and commute each day. Ani asked, how would I sign up my son for the program that's located in Dix Hills? So to clarify, Dix Hills is a Winston Prep School, 4th through 12th grade. You can apply by going to winstonprep.edu. Navigating to the Apply Now page, and you'll be able to sign up for an open house and start an online application. We have an online application system. Mark asked, do you have to be in transitions to participate in the Post-21 program? So John, do you want to talk a little bit about the Post-21 or?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much in the infancy stage. Yes, currently we're looking at it for students who are currently enrolled in our program, and that have aged out of the system and can participate in a myriad of what we're offering. Again, it's very much in the infancy stage, hoping to launch a pilot program in the fall. I mean, in the fall of 2021.
Right, and to clarify, we're looking into how we can be accessible through OPWDD funding.
Exactly.
Okay, Susan asked, how do you deal with elementary school age children, 2 toddlers who are potentially autistic? So with transitions, as you've been hearing, is for ages 17 to 21. Winston Prep Schools starts admissions at 4th grade. The basic approach is to look at students' evaluations and then our own assessments through the admissions process to develop an understanding of each student's learning profile and where the primary area of learning difficulty is coming from, and then address that primary area of need through the focus program and then through student groups that are homogeneous. So we group students who all have a similar learning profile. Nancy asked, does your program help students and families assess appropriate next steps, for example, college or work? So John, could you talk a little bit about, like, once a student is in the program, how we start to talk about the next steps?
Yeah, so again, it's extremely process oriented. We don't make any determinations until we've worked with a student for a while. If we're considering, here's an example. If a student and a family comes into the program and, college is what's on the radar, right? The college has to be the next step. We go through a process of assessment around that, from the overall participation in the program, their alignment with we really use, just to kind of frame this also, the qualities of a sustainable and independent learner, or the QSIL for short, is really our grading system. We don't give grades in the program. We're using that as a way to assess growth and development. So that's a big part of it. For someone who's on track to college, we have a partnership with Landmark College, which is located up in Putney, Vermont. We participate in a dual enrollment program. And our students can take college coursework with us for credit through Landmark College, and those credits are largely transferable to other universities and colleges. But more importantly, that information, that process, that experience provides us with really powerful data to be able to share. And it kind of goes back to Daniel's question about, his son. It helps us have clear, direct conversations with the individual, meaning the student, meaning the person who has the difficulties, whose life it is and whose future it's going to be, and also the family, right? Because you're part of that team. So we create a team around the student with let's say Daniel will use Luke as an example. Luke's the captain of his team. It's, enrolling him in that process, providing him with the transparency of information, data, hard facts that say, this is how you're performing. You're doing well, you're managing your coursework, or you're not managing your coursework independently. And these are the things we need to look at. That helps us identify appropriate schools. Maybe Luke needs to go, and I apologize for using Luke. It's there as an example. So I hope you don't mind, Daniel. Let's say, a school that is very centered, like Landmark, on specific LD. Maybe it's a local community college that has strong support systems, accessibility office, and the development of advocacy and resilience and self-reflection and regulation are all intact, right? They're functioning successfully, or at least they're in the strong development stage. So then we're talking about that. Again, the ultimate goal for everyone, whether they're going to college or not, is going to be the workplace. So the internships play a large role in that too. How are the students performing in their internships? How is, again, using Luke as an example, is Luke self-regulating? Is he resilient? Is he showing up on time? Is he, managing his tasks and following through and communicating and building relationships and really understanding feedback? Because feedback is going to be essential in college, it's going to be essential in the workplace, and it's going to be essential in their relationships throughout their lives, in whatever communities they're entering. So all of that, I know it's a long answer to that question, but all of that is what we use, that information, that data is what we use to then decide, or not decide, work with and partner with what might make sense moving forward.
I'm going to circle back to Ani's question just because she clarified. So Ani asked, her son is 18, so Dix Hills campus would not be an option. No. So Ani, it would all depend on, we might be a good fit for your son. And so the question would just be about how he would get to our location. We're located at 240 Madison Avenue, so about a 10-minute walk from Penn Station. So the question would really be how comfortable you would be with him taking the railroad in each day, if that would be feasible. I don't know how far out you are, but we don't provide transportation to and from home. We do support students with transportation to and from their internships. So we do travel training for students who need it, in terms of, if they know how to get to the Transitions campus, then we support them and teaching them the route to get to their internship, either from, for example, Penn Station or from our campus.
Yeah, and also to clarify a little further, we've also done some travel training with students coming in from Penn Station, from Grand Central. We've had team members meet students at the clock in the center of Grand Central. Usually, and I know, again, as a parent, I remember travel training my son on the F train. And it really usually takes about no more than 2 weeks, if even, before they really start to get the hang of it. It's a very clear, direct route. It's hard to get lost in New York City. And again, I know as a parent, it's terrifying to even think about that, pre-COVID, during COVID, whatever it might be. But what we've seen from students that are coming in, either from the Metro North or the Long Island Railroad, or navigating the subway system or an express bus, whatever it might be, that is the first leap into independence. And that's one of the reasons why we've never engaged in supporting or supplying transportation, because, and please don't take this phrasing the wrong way, but the little yellow school bus is not going to be in your child's life forever, just not. And they have to get on and move through their lives in an independent way. And this does provide that. And it's been very successful. If that makes you feel any better, I don't know, maybe not.
All right.
I'm more than happy for other people to pop on and talk too. I mean, we can, I think we could manage that.
Yeah, I'm just still trying to catch up on the questions that have gone in the chat. We still got quite a few. Okay, so Robin asked, in our program, do kids actually have jobs? So the answer is yes. Every student has an internship.